Hello, class. This is going to be my attempt at delivering you a lecture on the leg muscles. So before you get started, or we get started with this little lecture, make sure you have this in front of you. This is part of your worksheet that you're going to be filling out. So if you do not have this, go ahead and stop this little video and retrieve this and then resume and get started, because we will be filling this out as we go through this lecture. So let's get started. So we're going to be first talking about muscles that move the thigh. So the action is going to be at the hip joint. So these muscles cross the hip joint and they have action at the hip joint. All of these muscles have origins somewhere on the pelvis. So first we're going to be looking at hip flexion and then hip extension. So these are all anterior muscles. These are all posterior muscles. So these muscles are all going to be synergist to each other for hip flexion. These muscles will all be synergist to each other for hip extension. And these muscles will be antagonist to these muscles. They have opposite action. So make sure you understand it. Remember, antagonists are located opposite from each other. So these are anterior and these are posterior. So you must understand that concept of synergists and antagonists. You have to understand that. You will have multiple questions on your upcoming quiz and exam regarding that. So let's get started first with your hip flexors. So your hip flexors, like I said, were all anterior muscles. So these are going to be anterior muscles. They're going to be located somewhere up in here. And this is the motion of hip flexion, a forward movement of the hip at the hip joint. Pay no attention as to what is happening at the knee joint. We are only looking at the hip. So let's get started with our muscles. We're going to start with muscles number 1 and number 2. And 1 plus 2 will make muscle number 3. So let's see what those are. So our first muscles of hip flexion, these muscles are deep in the abdominal cavity. Here we've removed all the abdominal organs and we're left with these deep posterior muscles. So some people could call these core muscles too, because they're deep in the abdomen. We're going to start with muscle number 1. It is the iliacus. So we have a right and left iliacus. So the iliacus this muscle is in the iliac fossa. Remember the iliac fossa of our ilium? So iliacus in the iliac fossa. We have a right and a left. And medial to the iliacus, we're going to have the psoas major. And we also have a right and left psoas major. So make sure you write those down on your worksheet. Iliacus, easy in the iliac fossa, and psoas major is just medial to it. Now, on this drawing, we can see psoas major and iliacus. And once they pass under this structure, the inguinal ligament, so we see the inguinal ligament on both sides. Once they pass under, we are going to call them the iliopsoas. So iliopsoas is just a mashup of iliacus and psoas major. And so once they cross under the inguinal ligament, we now call them the iliopsoas. They are both inserting into the lesser trochanter of the femur. So they have a common insertion site. So I think that's it. So let's see what the iliopsoas looks like on our leg model. And you can pretty much guarantee this classroom model will be on your lab practical, so make sure you understand these two muscles. And then we're going to go on to our leg muscle, classroom leg muscle. So this is showing you the psoas major and iliacus here. So here's your iliac crest, so you can kind of see what this leg model is showing you. So psoas major, iliacus. Here is that very important inguinal ligament. Here's the pubic symphysis. This is the pubic, superior pubic ramus right up in here. But here's the pubic symphysis. So here's the inguinal ligament. So here is showing you iliopsoas. Easy to figure out because you are just following these two muscles and they are coming down into this region underneath the inguinal ligament. This is iliopsoas. Easy to see. And then we have this long strap-like muscle, number 5. This is sartorius. Sartorius is this long strap-like muscle. We'll talk about him a little bit later too, because he does cross two joints. He is crossing the hip joint to give us hip flexion. And then we have this muscle, muscle number 4, rectus femoris. Now rectus femoris also crosses two joints. That's why he's starred also. He is crossing the hip joint and he is crossing the knee joint. Rectus femoris is part of our quads. We have 4 quad muscles right up front, but rectus femoris is the only quad muscle that actually has crosses the hip joint too. So make sure you understand that rectus femoris is a quad muscle. It is the only quad muscle that is crossing both the hip joint and the knee joint. All the other quad muscles cross only the knee joint. So those are our hip flexors. These are anterior muscles. Easy to see. Psoas major, iliacus, iliopsoas, sartorius, and rectus femoris. Got that? So now let's look at our hip extension muscles. These are posterior muscles. So I like this little diagram because it's showing you this person at the gym doing hip extension. Backward, this is the hip joint is going the opposite direction as hip flexion. So we are going to be using these posterior muscles. The first muscle is the gluteus maximus and our hamstrings. We have 3 hamstring muscles. So let's look at these muscles. So here again is your classroom leg model. So you can kind of be guaranteed this is the model we will use for your lab practical. Here is muscle number 1, gluteus maximus. Gluteus maximus. If you stand up and extend your leg at the hip joint, you will feel the gluteus maximus contract. And then we have our 3 hamstring muscles. So our hamstring muscles are just distal to our gluteus maximus. There's 3 of them. Two of them are superficial. We can see them real easy. This first one is the biceps femoris. Now, biceps femoris, he's going to be your BFF. Biceps femoris, he's on your fibula side. Fibula. Remember, the fibula bone is down here. He is your lateral bone. So biceps femoris, remember all your hamstring muscles insert in the pelvis. They all insert on that huge ischial tuberosity. And they all originate in the ischial tuberosity up in the pelvis. And they all are going to insert either on the fibula or tibia. So I hope I didn't screw that up too much. But this is biceps femoris. Crosses two joints, crosses the hip joint, and he's going to be inserting on the fibula, so he is crossing the knee joint too. So biceps femoris, just medial to him, I call it the kissing muscle, is semitendinosus. Semitendinosus. He is inserting on the tibia side. So semitendinosus, inserting on the tibia side, and deep to semitendinosus is going to be semimembranosus. Hard to see here, but here is a close-up view. Here is biceps femoris. He's on the lateral side, and here is semitendinosus. Semitendinosus is medial to biceps femoris. So biceps femoris, semitendinosus, deep to semitendinosus is semimembranosus. Here you can see him peeking out right here, and he's peeking out right here. So a recap of our hip extensors are going to be gluteus maximus and our three hamstring muscles, biceps femoris on the lateral side, semitendinosus on the medial side, and deep to semitendinosus is semimembranosus. So got that? So let's see what we have next. Now we're going to do hip abduction, moving away from the midline. So again, I'm using this website because they have good pictures. They are showing you hip abduction, abduction. We are moving our leg, our hip, away from the midline. So we're moving away from the midline, and they're showing you the muscles that are doing this right here. We have your gluteus medius, gluteus minimus, which is deep to gluteus medius, and the tensor fasciae latae. Some people call this the tensor fasciae lata. I don't care how you pronounce it, as long as you can spell it. So let's look at this. Here is your leg muscle, your classroom leg muscle. So we are looking for our tensor fasciae latae, which is this little muscle right here. It's going to be originating up here in the pelvis, and it's actually inserting on this big white structure called the iliotibial band, or IT band. You need to call it the iliotibial band if I ask you what the structure is on a lab practical, because you cannot abbreviate, but in the medical community, it's going to be called the IT band or IT tract. But this is tensor fasciae latae. Tensor fasciae latae. And this muscle here is gluteus medius. Here's your gluteus maximus, but we are looking at gluteus medius. Now, gluteus medius is inserting here in the greater trochanter. So I'm showing you gluteus medius here, inserting in the greater trochanter. The greater trochanter is lateral, is the lateral part of the femur. So the gluteus maximus is inserting on the posterior aspect of the femur. The gluteus medius is inserting on the lateral aspect of the femur here at the greater trochanter. So the action I to O is going to lift the femur upwards. So this is going to be pulling the femur out and giving you abduction. Deep to gluteus medius, that is also inserting on the greater trochanter, is gluteus minimus. We cannot see it on our classroom model because it is deep to medius and we cannot remove our gluteus medius. So those are your 3 muscles of hip abduction, moving our hip joint away from the midline. Tensor fasciae latae shown here and here. Gluteus medius that inserts into the greater trochanter, and gluteus minimus that also inserts into the greater trochanter. Gluteus minimus is deep to gluteus medius. Got that? Tensor fasciae latae, gluteus medius, and gluteus minimus. Those are your hip abductors. Now let's do hip adduction, bringing that hip in towards the midline. We are bringing it in. Adduction, bringing it in. Again, I like this website because it is showing you the muscles of hip adduction. These are the muscles. So you can write them down on your worksheet. Pectineus, adductor longus, gracilis, and adductor magnus. So we are squeezing those inner thigh muscles and bringing them, our hips together. So a lot of women are working on these inner thigh muscles. These are our squeezer muscles, bringing that hip in. So hip adduction. So let's look at our hip adductor muscles on our leg model. So these are going to be on our inner thigh muscles, our medial muscles. So here we have pectineus, which is this little muscle here. Here is going to be adductor longus, pectineus adductor longus, pectineus adductor longus. Here is the pubic symphysis, pectineus adductor longus. Here's our pubic symphysis, and if we move in and get a straight shot of our medial muscles here, you can barely see gracilis here. So we have to move in medially, and now we're going to be able to see gracilis right here. Gracilis is another one of those muscles that crosses 2 joints. It's going to cross the hip joint and the knee joint. But here is gracilis. And here is adductor magnus. He is our biggest adductor muscle. So adductor magnus. This is just giving you some ideas so you can figure out where you are. Here is sartorius. So sartorius is crossing right here. So you can see sartorius crossing here. Going to be close to gracilis. Here's our vastus medialis, because that's one of our quad muscles, because this is the medial aspect of our anterior leg model. And these are hamstring muscles back in here. This is semimembranosus, our deep hamstring muscle, and semitendinosus. So hopefully I didn't screw that up too much. Pectineus adductor longus. Pectineus adductor longus. And then if we look at our medial view of our leg model, here is gracilis and adductor magnus. So hopefully you can see that. Gracilis, real hard to see here. Huge gracilis right down the middle here. So hopefully you can see those. I think we're going to stop there. I think we finished. Yeah. So make sure you can fill this out. So hopefully you have those all down. Get those figured out before you move on to the next set of leg muscles. So that's going to be it for this first video.